Yeah. It's just kind of funny. So,
Hey everyone, welcome to the Just Pick Something podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows. My name is Jakes, and I'm here with my co-host Franco, and the start of this episode contains some quick discussions on various topics like movie trailers that we've seen this week, TV shows that are just aired, and other media we've been enjoying, before going on to a longer, in-depth discussion of the episode's main topic. And the subject of this episode's main topic is the movie Nope, directed by Jorden Peele, released this year, 2022. Time codes will be in the description as usual. And before we start this episode, we actually have a quick announcement. We made an email so that anyone listening to this podcast can send us their opinions about the movies we've discussed or the TV shows we've discussed. We plan to read out any correspondence we get at the end of the episodes going forward until, well, just can't anymore for some reason. But keep in mind that there's going to be a significant delay in response time. We'll record and try to upload about monthly. So if you want to send us an email, please include a username, the episode or movie that you're referring, and keep your responses polite because we're real people on the other side of this podcast. So the email to reach us is jpspmailbag@gmail.com. I'll post the email in the description and repeat it again at the end of this episode. But with that out of the way, Franco, is there anything you want to talk about on today's episode before we go on to discuss Nope?
All right. Let me think. I watched a couple things. So I know that we're going to discuss this at some point, right?
is it Sandman?
Yep. I just started watching Sandman.
Oh, dude, I finished Sandman yesterday night.
Oh man. So I don't know if you've read the comic.
Full disclosure for anybody listening, I have 2 entire sets of the comic, not because I bought both, but I picked up the comic, fell in love with it. It just bloomed this interest in reading comics. It's the series that got me into reading comics in the first place. So after reading the first book, I went out and got the second, got the third, fourth, and fifth. And then I started dating my wife, found out she was a super big fan of the comics too. And then we eventually got married, and now we have 2 sets of that comic series.
All right, that's cool. I mean, yeah, I've read them. At least I've read the first 2 volumes. Never read the entire series. I never had, I read way too many comics, and I never buy all the comics that I want to buy.
I buy books or comics that I am absolutely in love with or would love to have a set of.
Yeah, that's fair.
Obviously, you could tell that Sandman would be one of those books, you know?
Yep. But so far as I'm into it, it's great. Can't wait to talk about this one in actual detail because I'm only like 3 episodes in, so I can't say anything.
Oh man, I over the moon and ecstatic and just cannot wait to discuss this because I am in love with how well they did with adapting the source material. I have some very minor nitpicks about the series overall now that I've seen it in completion, but it's hard for me with this bias I have of loving it so much that I have this huge set and then also a statue of Dream, a statue of Death, their crow. I love this series, right? So it's going to be hard for me to maybe be objective and give it some fair critique, but I do have some things in mind that I will say about it that, won't be just me fan gushing over it for an hour. Yeah, the last thing I'll say to wrap up my thoughts about Sandman without giving any spoilers is the moment that I get to see those characters pop up on the screen, I was like, oh man, what an absolutely perfect casting. Just their vibes and how I imagine reading them in the books, especially Desire. I won't say when or where they appear in the series, but the moment Desire showed up, I was like, oh my god, this feels like that gif of Dean from Community being like, oh no, is this going to awaken something in me? Because man, talk about capturing just the essence of what I would imagine the embodiment of Desire to be. Yeah, wonderful casting. Love them.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a different episode.
Yeah, coming soon.
But what else? I also watched on Netflix Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie.
Oh yeah, you mentioned that you've checked out some of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles stuff and that it was good.
Yeah, personally, right, the newer season is a little bit more contentious than all the previous ones. They did some major overhauls design-wise and character-wise and lore-wise. So a lot of old school Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle fans are like, I don't know about that. For me, it's anime Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which is it was an itch that I didn't know I needed scratched, and then the movie was peak, just anime nonsense action. They clearly, the animation team behind it and the people who write the story clearly have their full heart into it. So watching this movie was great. It's not a phenomenal film. It's pretty average, but they go all out. It's really fun. If you're a fan of the Turtles, it's just cool to see like a different take on how they establish like their lore and like their villains. You won't see some like there's a lot of people that you won't see that you're used to, but they're cool takes. And that movie was definitely one of my highlights from the last few weeks.
That's awesome. You know, speaking of things you've recommended to me, I've been seeing that movie on Netflix that you talked to me about last time, The Sea Beast. I've been seeing it pop up on like my feed being like, yeah, don't sleep on this movie, even though it might be geared towards kids. It's really well done. I think I even saw one of the actors talk about how like great it was to be on that movie because it's such a good and fun story to be a part of.
Yeah, I still totally recommend that movie. It's very the production team on that is also like peak.
Nice.
I'm very impressed with what they did, and I hope that I can see more stuff from them. Despite again, I'll stand by the criticism. They do have like the character designs are a little like uninspired in the sense that like we get similar designs to other series.
You mean kind of like a standardization of kind of like aesthetic?
Yeah, but for the most part, they know what they're doing, and it's really interesting to watch.
All right, cool. But well, for me, well, now that we've briefly talked about Sandman, one of the other things that I've been watching this week, Hulu show called Murders in the Building.
That one.
It features Steve Martin,
Yep.
Selena Gomez, Martin Short. I want to say, yeah, Martin Short. Yep. But yeah, great show. It's a lot of fun. I watched the first season and then it ended. It was left on this big cliffhanger. Sorry if that's a bit of a spoiler. The whole show is a murder mystery. It's not an adaptation of a podcast, but they do a murder podcast on the show, and that ties into the mystery that they are a part of. So it's kind of like this show that would only exist because it's commenting on how, you know, murder podcasts are so popular nowadays among everybody. Everyone loves a murder podcast like Serial and other really famous ones. But yeah, I watched it. It was great. I had a lot of fun. Season 1 ended. I moved on with my life. I saw season 2 coming up, and then I was like, oh, that's awesome. I can't wait to see what happens. And then it took me a little bit of time to get back into it because of the gap between seasons. Let the hype die down a little bit. But then when I started watching it, I would say around episode 3, I got really back into it. I'm like, all right, I'm hooked into the mystery again. I'm ready to go. Let's see where this ends. I hope this season ends off really strong, you know?
I've been meaning to watch it. I just don't have Hulu currently. So it's one of those things. If whenever something's on Hulu, I'm like, maybe hopefully it'll show up on Disney Plus one day, which is what I did for The Orville, and I'm super happy that it just went on Disney Plus today.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, I don't think Hulu is the streaming service that most people would be eagerly dashing to get, you know? Like, I think it's on the lower end of popular streaming service.
Yeah, it's you only get it because you bundled it with Disney Plus and ESPN.
See, I got lucky where years ago, I took advantage of a deal that Spotify was offering where they were bundling Hulu, basic Hulu with ads and Spotify Premium together for $10. And I eagerly was like, oh, that's a great deal. And then I got it and I've kept it ever since. I'm not getting rid of that deal.
That is a pretty good deal, not gonna lie.
Yeah, and now I'm grandfathered in and I eagerly make sure my payments updated just to make sure I don't lose that grandfather deal because companies aren't necessarily fond of people being grandfathered into really good deals, you know?
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah, and then the last thing I'll bring up so we can move on to our main discussion of Nope. It's not actually a TV show or movie, but there's been this band that I've been listening to a lot of lately. Their name is King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. They're from Australia. Have you ever heard of them?
Most definitely have not.
Other than having a really fun name to say that kind of feels like a tongue twister, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. It's this really cool band that's been around for a while that I'm just finally getting into, and it's hard to recommend them in the way where it's like, oh yeah, they have this one album. I think it's genius. You should go listen to it because I think you would like this rock album, right? But instead, it's like every album they do is a different genre or a different style with loosely connected things. And it's kind of like, oh, you want to listen to their classical album or their like instrumental album. That's cool. Go check it out. They have an album for that. Do you want to listen to an album where they feature a lot of microtonal music? Go listen to that. Do you want to listen to a few songs that kind of sound like they're taking or inspiration from the Beastie Boys? They got that too. Do you want to listen to a song where they're going to be like headbanging and you're going to be like rocking out and having a good time? They got that, you know? It's just they have tons of music to listen to, and I feel like everyone can find something to listen to. They have a song that will probably hit a genre that you're into, and they did, because I found a song that I was into, which was their song Shanghai. I was like, oh, this is great, and I want to listen to them more. And then that's what got me listening to like 4 or 5 of their albums repeatedly for like 2 weeks.
Okay, dope. They kind of give me, based on how you described them, they give me like Sparks vibes.
Oh, that's a band I've never heard of.
Oh, Sparks? Okay, yeah. So the only reason I know who Sparks is because Edgar Wright did a documentary called Sparks Brothers, and they're a band. I think it's in the documentary. It's described as the band that all your bands are inspired by.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they've been around for like decades, and their whole deal is that like they never try to do the same thing twice, and so they're just like very experimental and very forward thinking in their musical like design, and it's very neat. They have some very good music. I definitely recommend it.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I see them on YouTube. I'll definitely check them out. Because, I guess to wrap it up, yeah, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, I think they're a great band. I've been having a lot of fun just checking out their discography and checking out how every album seems to differ slightly in style. I even listened to a review from that one guy on YouTube who reviews like all the music, and whenever someone
Anthony Fantano.
Yep, Anthony Fantano. Like every time anyone pulls up a review of music, or to have someone talking about music review in like a thumbnail in a YouTube video, that dude's face always appears.
Hey man, he has a very memeable face. I don't know what to do. But yeah, I see it. Yeah, same thing. I see his face all the time when it has to do with music.
yeah. I went to check out Anthony Fantano's review about their albums, and I was like, yeah, all right, cool. Thanks for this review. I will check out these albums that seem to vibe with what I'm into or I'm currently listening to, which I guess is why he's so popular on YouTube, because every time somebody wants to check out an album from an artist they just found, they'll probably search that artist's name and his face will pop up.
Yeah, he listens to a lot of stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, definitely you should watch You should listen to Sparks as well, or at least try them out. I don't know if the documentary is still on Netflix, but Edgar Wright, I love Edgar Wright, so anything from him, I'll just 100% recommend regardless.
Nice. Watch. I'm calling it now. I'm going to guess that one day this band I mentioned, and I'm going to say their name again because it's just so much fun, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, one of their songs will probably end up in one of his movies, because you can just tell what kind of music that man listens to, kind of like James Gunn and the music he listens to.
Yeah, they have, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine what their like musical catalog looks like.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, with that, I think we're ready to move on to the main topic of today's episode.
Let's do it.
Yeah, never mind. Nope, I'm not ready. Okay, I had to use the name in it once. All right, so we're going to talk about the 2022 American sci-fi fiction horror film directed and written by Jordan Peele. It stars Daniel Kaluuya, Kiki Palmer, Stephen Yeun, and Michael Winscott, and Brandon Piera. And just a quick summary of this movie. We follow two ranch-owning siblings who attempt to capture evidence of an unidentified flying object, which I guess, according to this movie, the government recently changed how they classify unidentified flying objects. So now they're actually called UAPs. It's UAPs. It's UAPs.
I'm sticking with UFO.
I also will probably keep saying UFOs until it becomes so broadly adopted by pop culture that I will still end up using UFOs just to be an ungrumpy old man being like, back in my day, this is how we called aliens, you know? I like using outdated terminology when it's not harmful, like using old slang, like groovy. It's fun, man.
I mean, I use dope all the time.
That's a surprise. I don't think I've ever used the word dope once.
I swear I've used the word dope like 50 times on this podcast.
Oh yeah, I use dope all the time. I remember I got a confused look from somebody when I used the word yo in public, and they're like, what? But yeah, so real quick, have you seen Jordan Peele's other movies like Get Out and Us?
Of course. I watched Us in theaters. Get Out, I was a little late to the train on, just because it was like one of those like super overhyped movies. It was one of those movies where you hear so much about it, you're like, I have no interest in watching this. It's just like you guys selling it so highly that I can't believe that it's that good. I'm just gonna wait. And then I was like, I was wrong. You guys were right.
Yeah, I can totally get that feeling from his movies, especially Get Out when that came out. Talk about a huge cultural milestone for a lot of people. But for me personally, I did see both of his movies in theaters. I really liked Get Out when I saw it. I remember seeing that trailer the first time it showed up on the internet and thought I was watching one of those SNL clips or something, and it turned out to be real. And I was like, oh, this is going to be awesome. This is going to be an interesting movie. And then it turned out to be really good. When I went to go see Us, I was also pretty excited to keep that, feeling going now that I got to see that first movie.
Yep.
And with Us, it was just not my favorite movie. I don't think it was bad. I just didn't like it that much. I thought it was a little.
Oh, man, really?
Yeah. I thought it was a little. What's the right way to put it? Lost in what it was trying to attempt to do or comment on. There was a lot of things that it did really well. I think the horror was really good. Overall, I just didn't really like the movie that much. But with this movie, I thought it was great. I liked it a lot. I thought it was really dope.
So with Get Out, like I said, like I was a little late to the party with that. I get why people love that movie and they consider that their favorite of his filmography. He only has 3. It's not really like you're ranking much.
Yeah, he came out the gate really strong. He's made a name for himself in terms of directing and producing large-scale movies after his long career in comedy. And I understand why that's also many people's favorite, but I think for me this is probably my favorite of the 3.
So I see why people like Get Out. It is really good. I jokingly say that Get Out is people's favorite because they're kind of like the dad in that movie. I don't know if you remember the quote where he was like,
"Oh yeah, I voted for Obama
a third time." The people who love Get Out the most are like, I would have watched Get Out a third time if I had the chance. And I'm like, okay, guys, we get it. Then Us, I really enjoy Us. I thought it was great. I would have to rewatch it to try to see like what you're talking about in terms of like the looseness of it. Because for me, I remember it being a fairly tight film and me just like not 100% jiving with like some mystery there. But that might have been like, I would have to go back. I haven't watched it in a long time.
Likewise, I haven't seen it in quite a while. I think the way I want to describe it is I found most of that movie really enjoyable. I would say the first half really hooked me and I was really invested.
I have to remember. I think I wrote a review on it.
I mean, again, I liked it. I think in terms of the 3 he's came out with, which again, considering how small his film projects have been, relatively strong track record so far,
Yeah. So Nope is definitely my favorite. I think it's definitely his strongest. I would argue with anybody who says Get Out is the strongest film. I don't think so. I think this one, he tackles a lot of themes and balances them very well. It allows the audience to have more of a conversation with his work than any of the other ones do. Like, at least with Get Out, because it's the one that most people will compare it to in terms of like value. I was like, there's more that this movie tries to say and talk about than Get Out. And I think that it's both done on a stronger technical level, but as well as like a storytelling wise, I think that this movie does a lot more to push his filmmaking forward. He does a lot of stuff on camera work with how he edits his movies, how he tells the story, how he like the actors that he uses and why he uses certain things. I think very much that this movie is on an entirely different level than the other 2, and I understand why some people don't see that because there is a lot of enjoyment to come out of Get Out, and it was his first, and it was very innovative, and there's a place for it in regards to like black horror.
Yeah, plus it did capture a certain level of humor while also tackling hard subject matters to bring up in a movie.
Yeah, and there's some intimate fear in that.
Yeah, it's this fear that I think with the ongoing conversations of people of color and other minority groups finally being able to express and show their voice, they get to bring up topics and experiences that to a larger general audience might not be in their collective consciousness,
Yeah.
And with Get Out, it was a great movie that did that and started a lot of interesting and good discussion. And I also think it had a nice balance of like humor and horror while also being a good movie about commentary on society and stuff.
Yeah.
And, I think with that, and speaking of the 3 movies he's come out with so far, it's interesting to see that, at least in terms of humor, the first one, I feel, lent itself more to have humor mixed into it versus Us, which also had comedic moments, but more skewed towards the horror aspect of that overall movie. And in this one, I think it was a nice blend of all the ideas that we've seen so far. I think this movie had some really good usage of humor while also being serious, leaving a lot to be interpreted and examined, a lot of creative use of cinematography of the medium, and really taking advantage of the IMAX format.
Oh, did you watch it in IMAX?
I did not. Full disclosure, I didn't see it in IMAX.
Okay.
I got to experience it in just a regular movie theater's format. But once I found out that the IMAX showing took advantage of the format, I kind of went to see what other people were saying about it, and I completely see what they mean about using using the formatting and how it's slightly taller and how that would really take advantage of like how the movie tends to direct your eyes upward, you know, from the trailer to the posters to the actual use of cameras in the movie, you know?
Yeah. Do you want to go directly full on spoilers?
I think, yeah, I think from this point on, we're going to be spoiling a lot in this movie. We spoke quite a lot of non-spoilery talk.
Yeah.
And I think now it would be a good way to transition into that spoiler discussion. So yeah, from this point on, spoilers about Nope. And it's pretty clear that we both really like this movie. You should watch it. So do you want to start off the spoiler discussion? Do you have something in mind you want to talk about first?
Yeah, so there's so much to talk about with this movie.
God, there is, man.
Yeah. So there's so much because not only is there stuff in the movie, but there's like conversations around the movie that I think are super fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen a few interpretations of this movie, like people talking about the spectacle side of it, how animals are represented in this movie, what this movie could possibly be intending to represent, or all the different meanings this movie could have, which I think is probably one of the stronger suits of like Jordan Peele's movies, is that when he makes a movie, it's fun to talk about his movies because there's so much open-endedness to them.
Yeah, but they're still so concise that they're enjoyable films. But it's like, oh man, you can get this, and this out of like how this character acts, or why these characters do this, or why this was looking like this, right? So I guess we start from the beginning. It starts with an incredibly tense scene where you don't even see a monkey attack, a chimpanzee attack, and I'm like, yo, this movie started off wrong.
Dude, I thought I was watching another like movie studio animatic intro because
oh, you're talking when it's like you're like going through the little tunnel thing.
Yeah, because you know, his movie studio is called like Monkey's Paw.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And I was like, oh, this is just a continuation of something like that, right? I'm fairly confident that I was not the only one, as I've heard or people with similar react to that moment, or at least the opening moment. Like, I think I've seen it on Twitter or Reddit or just pop up on my...
Oh, where they thought the monkey attack was like a monkey's paw like thing?
I thought we were like, oh, this is another one. And the movie was going to start any second now. But no, it starts off this way. And I was like, oh shit, this is unsettling as fuck.
Yeah, no, it starts. I very much remember that when I watched it recently.
I watched it 2 weeks ago. I'm glad that you have it fresher in your memory than I do.
Oh yeah, I watched it Sunday morning.
Great.
At a matinee. So it's super fresh in my mind. Yeah, it's very much like not what you're expecting. It's very funny. I walked into the movie knowing that there was a monkey involved at some point.
Really? I didn't know anything about the monkey at all.
Well, the only reason I knew is because people were talking, like they were like, oh, the monkey in the movie. Oh, it'd be crazy when you see the monkey in the movie. So me walking into the movie thinking, okay, there's a monkey in this sci-fi movie. There must be like a monkey astronaut or something. That's what my mind was thinking.
Oh, no, that's pretty smart. I wouldn't think of it that way.
and then I see the opening and I'm like, oh, this is not at all what I was expecting. And I was like, and this is very unsettling. And then he continues the unsettlingness with the opening of seeing the film of the first film playing with what you find out later is like the bowels of the alien.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm like, oh, the atmosphere and the tone that you're setting right now is perfect.
Yeah. Oh man, I think it was really smart to start off with that scene instead of what I thought was going to be the natural opening of the movie, which we did get like moments after that initial scene. The opening, this narration over the animatic of the, you know, jockey riding the horse leading us into the movie. I think that was a really clever way to establish the unsettling aspect of this film. And I was like, oh man, I can't wait to see how this plays out in the movie, you know?
Yeah. From there, we get to see OJ, who's one of our main characters, and his dad, and he gets killed by like quarter. Was it a quarter or a nickel?
Again, it's been 2 weeks, but I think Keith David's character dies from a quarter.
Yeah, so the quarter goes through his eye and kills him, and I'm like, yo, what the heck? Like you know it's from the UFO, but it's one of those things where it's like, yo, what the heck is going on? Why?
And it builds so well because things just start dropping, and you're like, oh, is it raining? Is it like hailing or something? And then we get to see that scene play out, and it's very just devastating, especially that jump cut, Keith David's corpse on the table.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, no. Well, first I thought he was going to get abducted. I thought that was what was happening. Keith David's character was going to get abducted, and I saw like you see him for a second. OJ's character turns around, so you don't see him, and then suddenly you look back, and he's not on the horse, and I think that he's abducted. And I'm like, yo, that's crazy. That was quick. And then I see that he's on the floor and he's dying, and then you go through the car with them and the blood splurting out of his face.
And he's just muttering, trying to keep conscious, and it's just talking.
Yeah. And then you jump cut to him being dead on the table, and I'm like, oh my god, whoa, that's crazy. So
Yeah.
Which is great, because what that brings me to originally is like, so one of the readings that I did not take away from this movie, which I thought was very cool, was that the movie was mostly about grief and how one handles one of those moments in their life. They talk about later in the movie something called a bad miracle, right?
Yeah.
And they talk about so they talk about a bad miracle, right? And you could tell that this OJ is talking about a bad miracle, and it's mostly in reference to the fact that like, yo, a quarter fell through the sky and killed my dad, right? Like, that's impossible. That is what most people would refer to, like, if it was something good, money falling sky would be a miracle. But this is not that. Him and Kiki Palmer's character Emerald going through and like dealing with the ramifications of their father's death and like how that affects them. And I was like, I did not take this as like a personal story aspect, that level of like theme. So like it was very neat to like see that as like a viewing that people had, and like they took it like very personally, and they like were like really emotionally hit by that.
Yeah, I mean, to speak on that bad miracle segment of the movie, right? It's really cool because I really like when Kiki Palmer's character Emerald Haywood is just in talking to her like brother, and he says, what's a bad miracle, and they got a word for that, and there isn't. So she just shrugs and says, nope. It's kind of like the name or the word nope is the term for a bad miracle, because that's the answer that they gave,
Yeah.
Which is really cool. But I did not take away interpretation of this movie representing like, a way to deal with grief. I actually didn't really take away interpretation of this movie that many other people seem to have. I think like, I've seen this movie talked about on, for example, the YouTube channel Wisecrack. They mostly focused on this movie and how it related to the idea of spectacle, right?
Yeah.
The thing I took of it was mostly about how humanity seems to arrogantly think they could control and rein in not only animals but everything around them, and how like it's kind of just arrogant to think that they have control. And then the way the movie ends, it's like actually people they don't even realize is a bigger role in not only the environment, the world, and also how we just interact with everything around us, especially animals. Because the idea of animals and like controlling them and feels really present throughout this whole movie, from the chimp to the horses to the UFO. And I just thought it was mostly about humanity and their interaction with animals.
Yeah, so it's funny. Okay, so definitely saw that, and I definitely had discussed that with someone prior, where it was like very much like a humanity's arrogance in terms of role. But while you were saying that, it was very interesting. My mind immediately goes that, yeah, you're like, it does talk about that, and like the end of the movie is about how ultimately the only thing you really can control is yourself, as well as like the respect that you give towards other beings. Because the way that they end up kind of winning is that he's like, oh, you can't look it in the eye, because that's like, it's like territorial, so that like you're not respecting it and it will lash out, right? So like the idea that they're like, we use that as a way of controlling the situation and then end up killing it. But for me, what I pretty much took out of it, like the main point that I had originally came out with it, because I came out with a bunch of different, the list of things that I had to talk about with movie is insane.
Yeah, I had the one interpretation of it coming out, and then as this movie sat with me, I thought of a few different ones. Like, one thing about Jordan Peele's movies, it's always about kind of the Black experience in America and how a history of, African Americans have been unrepresented or just kind of ignored. He puts a lot of his experiences as a Black American into his movies.
But so when I first came out of it, a lot of it was my original like first level interpretation was more like an exploration of the relationship between a viewer and an artist, right? So obviously there's the alien in the movie is called a viewer, right? And there's a whole entire thing about creating spectacle and controlling spectacle. TV show that the Stephen Young's character was in when he was a child, that they had the monkey on, would have the attack. But there's a whole entire like the idea of like capturing this alien on film and like not being able to look at it in the eye. And it's this whole idea that like you, as someone who is creating, like if you're a creator in any form or medium, like the amount of pressure you put on yourself because of your audience is so detrimental that it could kill you. You're trying to control this reaction. Like you never know how the people who are digesting your media are going to react to it, right? So it could be that you're thinking that like, I'm putting this out there, I'm putting all this work, and the viewer isn't necessarily a good or bad entity, right? But it can have a negative response to you that is dangerous for you, right?
Yeah.
I was like, okay, Jordan Peele is at a point in his career where he is now being expected to form a certain way and to create a certain way. And so he's looking at it like, what kind of pressure and how much is that detrimental to him? And the source of that is obviously the audience, right? It's not himself for the most part that's causing that level of stress and, stuff. It's mostly that like there's an expectation that was no longer, that wasn't there. Like they mentioned in the movie, the cinematography guy talks about, oh, you have this dream that you're going to be on top of this mountain. You're never going to get there. You're never going to be satisfied. And the way that it is not as good as you think it is.
Yeah, this is Michael Winscott's character, Antler Hoist.
Yeah, and so he is having that conversation, and you can kind of tell that there's like some like personal, like Jordan Peele's like, yeah, this is how it is in this career and in the field to try and tame this beast that we have that is the audience and try to satiate it. But
would you say that you think that character, Antler's Hoist, is a kind of directorial insert?
I wouldn't say he is specifically. I would say the movie, and I can see Jordan Peele sees himself as like all of the characters pretty much, but like Antler Hoist is very much like that specific part of that theme. I very much don't think he's like that's like an insert, but
yeah, I think you're probably right about the characters in this movie all representing some aspect of Jordan Peele's either experience or personality.
Yeah.
Because like you can probably assign something like did with this character and refer it back to Jordan Peele.
Yeah, so you like you mentioned, you're talking about the racial aspect of it, and it took me a second. I was like, I know there's always like you said, there's always something on that level that would be spoken about or like you can point at. And there's obviously the beginning where they talk about the great-great-grandfather who was never recognized for his work and never appreciated it.
Yeah, which for anyone listening to this, the video that we got to see in this movie was real, but the name and the legacy was not.
Yeah.
The name was made up by Jordan Peele.
Yeah, there literally is no record of the first man on video.
Yeah, and there's actually multiple films of a man riding a horse, but it's just important to make that distinction because it kind of adds to the movie almost a little bit,
Yeah. So one of the things that I thought about as I was like trying to digest it was Steven Yeun's character specifically, because he was like an antagonistic quote unquote force for our characters. I was like, okay, usually there's people like to make a very clear like black or white argument about racial issues,
yeah,
right, in a literal sense. But I was like, I wonder if there's like anything about the Steven Yeun's character that I can like dig into. And for me personally, what I was recognizing was like the Steven Yeun's character, Jupe.
Yeah, Jupe.
Right?
Short for Jupiter.
Jupe's character, I was like, wonder where he fits in, because some people would say that the monkey stuff definitely adds a lot to like the taming of nature and the stuff you were talking about thematically. But I was like, there has to be something else there. And what made me think about was, Jupe was not only was he like a child actor, but he also represents kind of like the minority token child actor from like the 90s.
Oh yeah.
Right, where it's like, oh, there's a mostly white cast, but you have this young black character, or you have this young Hispanic character, in this case Asian, right? And the relationship that him and Gordy had on TV was that they were both the minority character inserted in that show, right?
Yeah.
And while it's a little suspect that I think this way, because it's like, are you saying that because it's like a legitimate idea, or is it like that kind of statement's kind of sus, Anthony? Okay.
Okay. All right. What is it?
So obviously Steven Yeun is young Asian boy and Gordy is the monkey, and the idea is that Jordan Peele didn't want it to be super on the nose about it, but the idea is that like Gordy represents another minority child. That's why I say it's sus, is because it's like, it's a monkey, Anthony. That's kind of rude. And I'm like, unfortunately, that is a stereotype and a slur that people use, and that's how they would refer, like, kind of sus.
Yeah. I see what you're getting at with this idea, and that how you say it's kind of sus, or might be reaching, over analyzing.
No, but so I'm saying it like in the sense that like what he's doing is he's telling a story where he's like, okay, so Steven Yeun's character is on the show and there's another minority character there. And then the other minority character has an outburst, right? A violent outburst. In this case, it's a literal violent outburst. But in a lot of cases, a minority actor has a quote unquote violent outburst. They're put down by the studio.
Okay. Yeah. I see what you're getting at.
Ostracized and referred to as like a problem. They have a bad attitude. Oh, they're violent. They're hard to work. And so like Peele is, I feel like the things that's going on right now is like he's remarking on how the industry treats specifically black actors, right? Because you'll talk about the John Boyegas who will have very outward opinions on the people that work with them. And then a lot of the film industry and a lot of fans will be like, oh, he's making a big stink out of everything. He has a bad attitude. He's a bad actor. Like it negatively impacts them to a point where it's like, yo, we're like, they basically killed this person's career, right?
Kind of like, I want to say his name is Ray Fisher, the man who played Cyborg in the DC universe.
Yep, Ray Fisher. So Ray Fisher, he has a quote unquote outburst in the sense of the studio system, right? And they're like, oh, we blacklist Ray Fisher. Oh, his career's ruined. He's dead in this industry, right? So like, I feel like you can grab that because like effectively what happens is something out of his control, right, happened, and it caused him to react. And because he reacted in a way that people don't like, he's put down. And obviously, in this movie, it's exaggerated because he's actually the Gordy is actually killing people.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So what you're saying is it kind of doesn't work 1-to-1, but I can see the argument you're making and how you got there. I definitely see what you're getting at.
Well, I think like I'm not saying like it has to be 1-to-1. It's just like a symbolic kind of meaning.
Right.
Because then Gordy at the end of his outburst tries to go to the only other minority character that's around him, right?
Yeah.
And tries to like show like a an image of camaraderie, which is fist bump, and he gets shot and killed. And Steven Yeun's takeaway from that isn't one of like, oh, Jupe's reaction to that isn't necessarily one of like, oh man, this person that I was close with and was like in a similar situation as me was hurt by this, right? But like I'm able to still move on and continue to do stuff, which is also like I want to say there's like a tiny little bit of the whole entire like the word model of the model minority myth.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right, where people consider Asians a model minority, so as opposed to black people they don't consider black people a model minority.
I can see how these negative stereotypes kind of lead to this idea.
Yeah, so like it's just like one of those things where it's like, hey, yeah, so like Steven Yeun's character is like, oh, and then he marries a white woman. He continues to try to exploit others for his own benefit, and he's like, I'm in the right for this. Like he literally says, I've been chosen, right? So it's this idea that he thinks there is like a level of superiority in his character,
like arrogance.
Yeah, of arrogance. And it's like one of those things where it's like, yeah, like if you are considered a model minority, you would be like, it's perfectly okay for me to act like, oh, white people like me, right? Unfortunately, that's it. Again, it's a myth.
Yeah, it's a myth.
Right? There's a reason it's model minority myth.
Yeah.
Like I'm not saying that this is actually how it is and like how people should react.
No, it's just an unfortunate negative stereotype that exists in the world.
Yeah, it's a negative stereotype that is like, yeah. And then, so, Steven Yeun's character is antagonistic towards OJ and M.
But you know what? I didn't interpret that as like outright hostility though.
No, but he does take advantage of them and their how.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like he's aware that they're in financial trouble and he's buying their horses. Essentially like the only thing that's able to keep them afloat and pretty much sacrificing them. So cutting off any potential revenue long term, because they try to propose that they want to buy back their horses, but we as the audience get to figure out that's not going to happen,
Yeah. So that's why I'm like, I feel like that is like a theme that you can get out of it, right? And I'm not sure if he was going for that, but it is very much something where I was like man, like his character just represents so much.
Yeah,
the arrogance, like the status that he has and like the power that he has over you regardless of you see it as power, right? Because you're like, well, he's just a guy, like he's just buying stuff. He's like, no, but you have to understand that he is leveraging the fact that he has the money they need, right?
Yeah.
So like take advantage of the situation.
I really liked his role in this movie. I think his character Jupe was very well done, and a big part of this movie probably wouldn't be the same without his involvement, like his character's storyline. I see what you were getting at with that interpretation. I didn't pick up on that interpretation really at all. Though interpretation I think I came to because, like I said, I mostly center in on the idea of like animals. These characters kind of grew up around animals, and it was their job to like interact with them, and OJ's job was kind of to like tame them, you know?
Yeah.
And they each had these special relationships with these animals, but like you suddenly, you know, it is an animal and it could like kill you if you aren't careful or you don't know how to properly interact with them, right? So that's mostly how I interpreted its role, like in terms of the chimp and how the animals interact with the characters. And
yeah, of course.
But I will say, as you were discussing this other interpretation you had that centered more about like race and stereotypes and everything, I think the representation of the characters in this movie kind of made me feel like this could have this possible interpretation, kind of like a commentary on how groups have to almost compete with each other to acquire a level of like success. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, it feels like in this movie, you know, with hindsight and an outside perspective, it feels there is a world in this movie that could have existed. OJ and his business, Jupe and his business could have come to some kind of like merger or partnership agreement where they both could have helped each other make money for both their businesses and support each other. And instead, we are presented with the reality in this world where it almost feels like they're naturally pitted against each other because it feels like they have to each take care of their own things and they have to like come out on top for themselves and their families. And it's kind of just like this vicious cycle. I would say these characters and their businesses were doing relatively well up until recently where the events of this movie started to take place, right?
Yeah, I mean that's fair too. Yeah, because there's also like the idea that maybe like okay, so there's also the idea that humans are kind of framed as also predators, and so you talk about the Haywood Ranch is one territory that they never let Jupe into, right? Like that is their territory, and then talking about them being territorial and like you can't do certain things. But Jupe is also has his territory, and he understands like, oh, the way that I get you is I let you in, and I can take advantage of these kind of things.
I mean, even talking about Angel's character, right, and with the idea of territory,
yes.
You have this guy coming in. At first, the Haywood family is a little hostile towards this outsider coming into their area.
Yeah, they're very much like, okay, you can leave now.
Yeah, and understandably because, you know, again, in this movie, everyone's out make their money or their mark on history by capturing some kind of evidence of this UFO, right? I think there's just so much you can interpret in this movie and take away from it outside of just the surface level of reading of it, you know?
Yeah. Okay, so real quick, I don't know, I didn't watch videos talking about the spectacle half of it.
I watched a bunch of YouTube videos to try to help remember some of the plots and the moments of this movie.
Okay.
Since it's been about 2 weeks, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I didn't have time to go watch it again or the money and you know.
Yeah. So okay, so real quick, I don't know if anybody has said this, but I think the three names of Angel, Emerald, and OJ were very intentional. I think they all come into play in the final act, right?
Oh yeah, names are very intentional in this movie, from the names of the horses like Ghost to the names of the Haywoods and Jupiter.
Yeah.
They all feel like they have a purpose behind their naming.
So Angel's name, I feel like is like a reference to the true form of the alien.
Oh yeah.
Which you find out it's a creature, right? Mm-hmm. But then it has like this big like biblical angel form that it comes into. Like, you know, if you ever actually read what the biblical version of angels are, they're like these like the seraphim spinning formless like beings.
What is it? The biblical depiction of an angel, it can be like a spinning wheel with multiple eyes on fire.
Yeah.
You know, they usually, what is the term they always say, like in that people reference to, like, be not afraid, because they're horrifying.
Yeah, they're absolutely terrifying beings. Yeah. So like the idea that like he's a reference to one, an alien coming down from the heavens is also like, you know, kind of like a miracle, right? And mm-hmm. Emerald, I feel like is a reference to like when it shoots out, it's like eye stalk thing.
Oh,
like
yeah.
Shiny green color that like you're supposed to like stare at, and she's like the real showy person in that like
mm-hmm.
group.
Yeah.
Right. But then if there's anybody who's like very specifically named for something, it's OJ. And you can get this very early on when he first says his name's OJ. He says it to the older white lady that was like on the commercial, right?
Yeah.
And her response was like, "Oh my God, your name's OJ?" And like you're supposed to, as an audience, know that the reason she responded that way is because she's thinking of OJ Simpson.
Yeah. The whole pop culture impact of OJ's name,
Yeah.
which, funny enough, watching some media from before his very publicized court trial and like things have come out afterwards, like the documentaries and stuff. He was in movies. He was a pop culture person, you know? Like, I think, what was he in?
Yeah.
Airplane 2? Or
something like that.
Yeah.
But so yeah, obviously he's very clearly named for like the idea of like OJ Simpson.
Mhm.
But one of the biggest TV spectacles of all time, right? No doubt, is OJ Simpson in his Bronco driving around being chased by the police for several hours.
Yeah.
And the third act of this movie has OJ riding around on his Bronco.
I didn't catch that.
So the idea that like, well, that's a very clear reference. A Bronco is a horse. OJ is riding his Bronco being chased. And if that's a very cool reference, people should get that. I have not heard anybody mention it.
Because I didn't put that two and two together. Wow, that is a good catch. The one that I and many other people obviously noticed was the Akira reference with the bike slide.
Oh yeah, 100% that too. But
yeah, I can't express how much I love when that reference pops up. It's just everywhere. You know what I mean? Like this movie, anime, TV shows, movies. I think you can even look up just compilations on YouTube. I could just go on.
I don't think any superhero movie has ever done it, which is surprising as all heck. Because if you told me someone's going to do an Akira slide, I swear I would have seen the Flash do it.
I mean, it's been done in like Steven Universe and like
Craig of the Beat. But so yeah, so there's that. But like, there's a lot of stuff that's clearly peppered in from Jordan Peele's like actual experience in like media, because they talk about SNL in the movie. They talk about a very specific actor. So you know, he talked about him and how he like he's a very clear reference. And if you know his story, talks about how he messed up his neck getting too into a skit. So the idea of like trying to do like the level of spectacle is dangerous to like, you know, to the people. They mentioned the Oprah shot, and they have a very clear reference to a woman who was on Oprah for being attacked by a chimp.
Yeah. They even designed the character who was attacked by a chimp in this movie off her appearance on that show.
So the idea that
plus there was a real life tragic event where this beloved chimp pet ripped the face off their owner aggressively a few years ago.
Yeah, so you're talking about like, yeah, there's multiple levels of like real life, like actual references that Jordan Peele's making. And so that's why I'm like, when people
I mean, one other reference is even the UFOs, or the UFO in the movie, when they do their, I guess what we can call the full biblical depiction of an alien, right, or an angel, the way their eye moves out and almost seems like a shutter, like a camera shutter, kind of leads into the whole theme of speckle, like the way everyone's eagerly trying to capture this alien on film or some kind of like documentable evidence, and then you have its actual appearance and the way it uses its eye.
It's actually designed from like a digital. They designed the inside stock to look like a digital like capture thing that they have in cameras, so that is actually 100% accurate.
Okay, but so we spoke about some possible interpretations of this movie.
All of them.
I mean, we did talk about a lot of them, yeah, including all the use of the word spectacle. If there is one term I've heard just nonstop when it comes to talking about this movie, it's the word spectacle. I've seen it in YouTube videos, in thumbnails, in like articles, in interviews, and then we've used it a lot.
I mean, it doesn't help. Right? The guy kind of said it himself, and it was about that. So.
Yeah, Jordan Peele.
Yeah, he didn't help himself. He kind of framed the conversation himself, as opposed to like someone else coming up with an idea. Like it's not like Logan Paul is like the center of the conversation or anything.
Yeah, funny enough, I did see a response someone did about his take on this movie.
Oh my god, it's a bad take.
Yeah, no, it's a bad take. Without quoting the actual tweet direct, I think it just came down to him not enjoying the movie and the meaning was lost on him.
Yeah, I saw a lot of people was like, oh no, this person, Logan Paul is entirely correct. And I'm like, no, most of the stuff that he complains about are either not important or are addressed in the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of Logan or Jake Paul, but I won't focus too much on that. I am actually kind of excited to talk about like if you liked the horror aspects of this movie or the sci-fi aspects of this movie, because I thought they were really strong.
So I think this movie is really good on both aspects, but I also think that if you go into it expecting a film like the last two films from Peele or like generic horror slash sci-fi movie, this is not your film.
Yeah, for sure. I can see that.
I talked to someone the other day about like the idea that like an audience can digest media incorrectly, right?
Hmm.
In the sense that like there are a lot of people who watch this movie and their takes from it, I feel like aren't necessarily like you're dumb, you need to like like there's always like the meme, oh, you need a 200 plus IQ to watch Rick and Morty.
Yeah, that kind of take. I know what you mean.
Yeah, so like I think that that's like disingenuous to like hold people to like a certain standard of like intellect, but I do
Hmm.
think that it is possible for someone watching a film to do it incorrectly in the sense that, you are looking for something and you're not getting that specific something and not recognizing what the film is giving you itself.
Hmm.
So my go-to example is like when you're about to eat or drink something and you have like something else entirely in mind in terms of flavor. Like you drink a Coke expecting Dr. Pepper and you're like, this is disgusting because I was expecting Dr. Pepper.
Yeah, and especially if you get led into believing you're about to experience something a certain way. An example I can think of most recently is we briefly talked about the Sandman adaptation from Netflix earlier in
Yeah.
this recording, right? Initially, when I heard about that, I was excited because it's one of my favorite comic books of all time. I was like, oh, I'm hyped, I'm excited, I want to see what's going to come of this and see how they do, right? And the trailer came out and I was like really excited for this project, but that trailer was awful in my opinion. It felt kind of standard and geared towards a mainstream audience. It didn't make me excited about the project other than me already knowing all of its potential. Like it had the most generic, like I don't know, kind of standard, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's funny too because after this movie had ended, one of the things that I did before this film came out was I basically was like, I'm ignoring anybody who says anything about this movie. I'm super excited for it. People are saying the final trailer spoils too much. Let me just ignore it, right? Let me just not watch or read or consume anything in regards to this movie other than that Jake had. Let me see what this movie's about, right? And I go back after the film and I watch the final trailer, and the final trailer for this movie is hot garbage. Like not only on like a selling this movie aspect, but like in like a general trailer sense.
Yeah.
If you did go into this movie expecting what the final trailer was selling you, first off, you were expecting a bad movie to begin with, and then second, you were sold an entirely different film than what Peele was giving you, right? Which is just I think it's a bad choice of marketing.
Yeah.
You can have a good, like, I feel like there's a really good like bit of like the first two acts that you can probably edit into a really solid trailer that has nothing, that's not like real spoiler or whatever, right?
Mhm.
But like some reason, whoever cut the final trailer together, I was like, man, you did this movie a disservice.
Yeah, and it's hard because or at least the art of making a trailer is a tough business and a thing to be a part of because you have so much sway and like influence in how a general audience will initially perceive a movie going into it, right? But so much outside factors kind of contribute to it, like what studio it gets hired to do the trailer,
Yeah.
how much influence they actually have, how much influence the people that hire them get to say in their initial input. And then sometimes we've seen the power of a trailer and their editing to completely change the direction of a movie, like the original Suicide Squad movie that came out.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah, the trailer made that movie look way more entertaining than it probably would have been. And then the studio panicked and shifted the entire course of that movie, which may have resulted in the terrible final product of that movie.
It's crazy because that's a good example of when you go back to like the very first trailer, it sells a very different movie than the Bohemian Rhapsody trailer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. The studio was like, oh my God, I really like the Bohemian Rhapsody one so much better. Let's change the entirety of our movie to fit that. And I'm like, oh my God, I hate you guys.
Yeah. And a current example of that is there's a movie that's I think currently out or will be out soon called Bullet Train, starring like Brad Pitt and a few other notoriously big name actors, right?
Mhm.
I don't know anything about the movie. The trailer makes it look a lot of fun because it uses that language dub of like staying alive. The cutting and the editing makes the energy of that movie seem like alive and entertaining. But I did get this feeling of like, oh, I wonder if this is kind of that Bohemian Rhapsody trailer that I saw for Suicide Squad all those years ago, just again for another movie that may not be this exciting or this fun to watch as I'm actually going to enjoy it, you know?
Well, I think for that one, I haven't watched the movie yet, but I think one of the people behind Deadpool made that movie.
Oh, see, that makes me feel like it's promising and that the trailer actually sold me what that movie was going to be like.
Right. But anyways, back to Jordan Peele. So yeah, so the idea that this film, right, like I feel like people walked into it and they digested this movie incorrectly because it's not necessarily like a jump scare or like gory, like a typical horror film that we see nowadays, right? Or that people associate with horror, right? Like they're like, oh, the Halloweens and like the Friday the 13th and the Freddy Krueger's of the world. And it's like, yeah, but like horror is also like Jaws. Jaws is a horror film.
Which I've seen this movie slightly compared to Jaws in marketing and interviews.
Yes, there's that, and then there's, movies like, The Shining and films like that where it's like there's slower burn films that are horror that like lean more heavily on the character and the tone and the overall like style of the film that I think this movie is definitely more in line with than what I think a lot of people do when they say, hey, this is a horror film. I feel like nowadays more people can what Nope is like a thriller, quote unquote.
Yeah, okay.
Right, which I guess is fair, but I think that like automatically putting slow burn horror into thriller.
I think by labeling a horror movie as a thriller movie is kind of just semantics a little bit. There are really good horror elements in this, like the sound editing and like moments of just downright just fear and terror. For example, the blood raining down on the house, people screaming, above them, and everything is just completely darkened while all the rain is cast around them and leaving this empty hole or chasm of fear, which I would say, even if the whole movie just had that one scene, that to me is enough to label this as a horror movie.
That moment alone, like the raining blood scene, first off, preceded by the creature, like we haven't talked about the fact that this isn't an actual like ship, it's an actual creature.
But I cannot express how much I love this take on an alien UFO story. I think it's one of the more original ideas for an alien movie.
Yeah.
And I'm also surprised it hasn't been done before, where the idea of a traditional like alien spacecraft with the like circle hasn't ever really been depicted in like a mainstream movie as an alien creature. That to me is surprising, and I love the way they did it in this movie.
Oh yeah, 100%. But basically the fact that it was preceded by the Jupe has his show and they all get attacked by the creature, and then following the attack, all you hear when the thing is flying around or in the canyon is the screaming of the people from inside. Like you even get a good look at them being like eaten.
Yeah, and the way that when they are screaming and they're being like this claustrophobic just encapsulation inside this creature, and then their scream just cut, like it just stops, and that they're consumed. That is horrifying and unsettling without actively having to show a lot of gore, because they're like, the gore in this movie is just, the after effect of the carnage, which is really cool.
Yeah, so when they did the scene where it's pouring down rain and you get this creature flying around and he acts like the eye of a storm, where it's like the calm in the middle of the storm, there's no rain, and then suddenly all the blood just gushes out, covers the house. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is absolutely terrifying.
And then the way they play with the weather and the whole idea of having to constantly look up without looking up, it kind of just like, I love that they took advantage of weather and environment. The way the UFO kind of flows and floats over the mountain ranges, how it just kind of like soars and changes direction and like reaches back. And then the way all the characters constantly want to look up, or they look at the cloud that's not moving in the distance, and your eyes are always just kind of searching for where it could be, that's so cool. And then I'm so glad they incorporated rain into this, because man, talk about a horror staple, just having something scary being on a dark and stormy night. And the way this creature moves throughout the rain just adds to the level of like horror intensifying, so good.
Yeah, and it's at that point where it feels like there's a switch that goes off in the creature. It seems at first it felt weird to me that like for a good bit it was like kind of complacent in how it acted. It was just going around eating horses, but it never really was like attacking anybody that we could see. It obviously had attacked people because it had swallowed up like coins and keys and stuff, right?
Right.
We know that the creature had eaten people because it had like nickels and quarters and keys and all that stuff. But throughout the movie, it hadn't done anything active in the sense that like it never went after people or it never like seemed like an aggressor.
At least that we got to see or notice, because as the movie starts off, there were at least events of it abducting people without anybody realizing.
Yeah, because they had mentioned that there were people gone missing and stuff,
which was very good, very well done.
Yeah, and so the idea that the movie's going forward and there's like a switch that turns on for this creature where it's like, oh, I'm kind of done eating just horses, and so is like the catalyst where he's super loud, showy, so he's calling the creature towards him basically because he attracts sound originally. And
Yeah.
then he goes, sucks up that entire group of people. That's when it decides that like it's gonna start like actively hunting.
Oh yeah.
Right? Because it feels like the reason it poured out all the blood on top of the house was entirely like a show of force, like get out of there. I know you're in there kind of thing.
Really, because I interpreted it as marking its territory.
Well, the main reason I said that is because like it had shot out things clearly earlier in the film.
Yeah.
Right? But it wasn't trying to eat anybody at that point.
Okay.
But it was trying to eat Angel because he had played all the loud music and then had to run back to the house. And then it like gushed out all the stuff directly on top of where they were instead of just like immediately leaving after Angel ignored it. Right? Yeah. So it feels like, and then it also falls in line with like later on in the film, it starts like actively chasing people. It turns into its big, like old, like billowy self, as opposed to earlier in the film where it never felt the need to do any of that stuff.
Yeah, that's why I interpreted that moment with the blood raining down on the house as it's finally marking its territory because its aggression dials up after that scene, you know?
Okay. I mean, that's fair. I totally understand that take itself. I see both. So that seems peak though. Like entirely like the fact that people are like, it's not a horror film because it's not that scary. I'm like,
yeah, it's crazy that someone doesn't think this is a horror movie because aside from the rain of blood falling on this house, you have that moment where Jupiter is looking up at the sky and you don't get to see what's happening, but you know what's going to happen. And then OJ arrives on the scene and it's a ghost town and it's just unearly quiet. All the cars are there. People were there and they're just gone now. You know, the movie starts off with the aftermath of what looks like a violent animal attack, which is also a horrifying moment and scene. There's so much good moments of horror sprinkled throughout this movie that it's crazy that someone can be like, I don't know, I don't think I see it as a horror movie.
Yeah, and then there's also the most traditional on the like nail on the head kind of horror moment is when Jupe's sons are dressed up as aliens. Oh my gosh, that first off, that was absolutely terrifying.
Oh yeah, very well done. I love that the character OJ just said the name of the title of the movie and just nope.
Yeah.
Because when that first time the alien just popped up out of the corner and then comes out through the door, I was also like, nope, get the fuck out of there. Fuck this. No, you need to go, man. I have already invested too much love into your character. I need you to survive this movie.
Yeah, and then I love the fact that he gets surprised by one of them and punches it in the face. And I'm like, yes, exactly. That's what you're supposed to do in this moment. Punch that thing in the face and run.
Yeah, and then the kids are like, stop messing with Jupiter's place. His sister Emerald is kind of like, oh, we need to retaliate, we need to get them. And he's like, well, you stole their horse. And she's like, yeah, true.
But one, that scene is like masterfully done. It is exactly, I think that's what people were expecting from the entirety of the film, right?
Yeah.
And he obviously knows that, but what we got is like such a smart deviation from typical horror and sci-fi that I was like, no, but like this is great. Like what you're talking about would have been fine and good, and you would have really enjoyed it because it would have been scary because those things are terrifying. But like this would be phenomenal.
I mean, I think that's part of the reason that scene was included, and also people had some thoughts going into the movie what it was going to be like. Because, like I said before, I think this is probably one of the most unique takes on a UFO. Because, like I said, I don't think in terms of mainstream theater or movies, I don't think I've ever seen someone take the idea of a spaceship being an actual alien creature, Like the only times I've seen the idea of an alien being this kind of floating weightless creature is when I've seen like speculative biology YouTube videos of what an alien creature could look like if they lived on Jupiter or something, which adds a whole level to the naming of this character, Jupiter or Jupe.
Yeah. So I think it's so cool. It's very much smart subversion. And I get it. I understand why people didn't enjoy that. But again, I was like, no, just like enjoy the movie for what it is, not what you're expecting from it. I'm sure there's someone who listens to like most of our stuff and is like, hey, you're a hypocrite. You didn't like Thor Love and Thunder, and that's supposed to be a kid's movie. And I'm like, look, I can change my opinion from week to week. It's fine.
Yeah. I mean, I think clearly we both enjoy some media geared towards kids that could be enjoyed artistically or just appreciate the work and craft that you put into it, like the Sea Beast that you recommended to me
Yeah.
or just other things. But yeah, I think I understand why someone would maybe not be super into this movie. I think Jordan Peele's movies specifically have this feeling of like you might not know what you're going to get out of them because he does or tries to incorporate a lot of commentary or like incorporation of certain themes or ideas.
He's really subversive about like the genre itself.
Yeah.
So no, like so you're like when we're talking about like Us and Get Out and this movie now, it's like you very much are like, oh, this is a psychological thriller, and you're like not expecting the way that it was done. And Us is more akin to like a regular slasher film, and it still also like has its subversion in the story.
Yeah, right. And like I was mentioning before, I wasn't a big fan of Us. I need to probably go watch that again. Maybe I'll have a different take on it. But coming out, I wasn't as much into it as I was the other movie. But that's kind of what I mean about you don't really know what you might get or experience when you watch one of his 3 movies that he's come out with so far. But so far, I'm really enjoying the ability to walk in and not know what I might be getting. And, you know, with this movie, it was great. I really liked it.
I will say this. There is one thing you can always expect from Jordan Peele's movies, and that the cast is freaking amazing.
Wait, say that again?
Said the cast?
Oh, the cast. Gotcha. Yeah, no, the cast is solid. It is freaking amazing. Like,
First off, Daniel Kaluuya, I hope he makes a movie with Daniel Kaluuya all the time. He's him great.
yeah. For sure. And I'm really happy to see Keke Palmer being in a movie. I kind of miss seeing them in more mainstream stuff. And also, I love Stephen Wynn, you know? Yin.
Yeah. And then Angel's actor.
Oh, Brandon Piera?
I think Brandon. Oh man, I'm blanking entirely.
No, yeah, Brandon Piera's
But-
character, Angel Torres, right?
Yeah, so him, he was great in this film. I mean, I would say that the only person in the movie that I was like less than stellar about getting out of it was the person who plays Antler
Hoist?
only because he was like the only person that I read out of the entire cast like hamming it up.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I liked his character because I understood what he was supposed to represent. This guy taking advantage of the characters and this opportunity to make his own name based on completely off their discovery.
Yeah.
But I also kind of like how where he's like obsessed with chasing this perfect shot and it ultimately leads to his death. Plus, I kind of like how the characters understood all of that and they knew he was doing this. They were excited to be able to take advantage of his like desire to get that perfect shot, you know? Like it worked for both of them, even though it was kind of malicious in his intent.
Yeah, so like slight return back to like themes and stuff like that. There's a one take that I've also enjoyed seeing about this movie is that it's kind of like a love letter to the crew and the people involved in like the more physical and technical side of making a movie, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about like the movie ends with OJ, riding around. He's an animal handler first, but he's wearing a crew sweatshirt. And the people who survive are the guy who works crew, the lady who helps with the animal handling, and the dude who does the tech support stuff.
Yeah,
right?
that works at a fry that is apparently from watching and listening to YouTubers live in California and worked in the industry. That fry is very beloved or notorious because many people in the industry would go to that fries until it got shut down because they closed all their businesses. So that fry specifically has a special place for a lot of people in Cali.
So that's why I was like, it's pretty neat that they did. Like, I feel like there is like a level to the homage part. So the idea that like, I think it also ties back into the idea of like black exploitation in Hollywood, right? Where the idea is that like it starts off with the idea that the director or the cinematographer of the first ever video clip was remembered, but we don't know the name of the person riding the horse, and it happens to be a black man. And then we end the movie and we have the final act where the cinematographer, this big name filmmaker, is trying to go out of his way to like break away from the actual plan to like find his perfect shot, and then he ends up dying.
Ends up dying, and we never find out if the footage he shot is even usable. you know?
Yeah, and but I think that's really neat. Like, it's a good take on it. First, also entirely separate from that, I thought it was also really cool that he uses an IMAX camera.
Hmm.
So the camera that the Angel is loading is an IMAX
Oh,
camera.
really? Interesting. I don't know what an IMAX camera looks like, but that's cool.
It's a big old rectangle like suitcase of a camera.
Okay.
Super heavy, super difficult to work with. They're like notoriously difficult, which is why like a lot of movies that use IMAX cameras only do it, like 20% of a film or like 15% of a film. Like, oh, big action sequence and that's it.
Yeah, I understand that most productions rent the equipment, especially, and there's only a certain amount of IMAX cameras in existence.
Yeah, so the idea that you use one is like very cumbersome, and you have to do it if you don't know what you're doing, it's not worth it, right?
Hmm.
But it's interesting that he uses that because he's a cinematographer, and the idea is that he would want captured on IMAX,
Right.
but also the cinematographer that Peele uses for the film is considered the best in the industry when it comes to IMAX.
Yeah.
Like, him and his team are entirely like, if there's a name attached to IMAX in the movie industry, it is this guy and his crew, because they know exactly how to use the cameras.
Right.
And so it was very cool that Peele used him, and then he actually got his input, like, oh, if you wanted to catch an alien, what camera would you use? And the guy said IMAX cameras. And then because of that, he used an IMAX camera in the movie as what the cinematographer uses to capture the alien.
Yeah, no, I think that was really clever. And as you were speaking to it earlier, I like that this movie ends the same way it's kind of started, with the depiction of a black man riding a horse, and we all know his name. And it feels like this ends on a positive note, where they and the family, the Haywoods, are going to have their name finally marked in history as the first people who were able to take an actual picture of a UFO, and maybe Angel as well, because who knows if that footage that they shot actually still holds up, and it might, because it was all left to like interpretation and your own like feeling of what would happen next.
Yeah. Also, I will say this: the only thing that like kind of took me out for like a millisecond was I did think Angel was gonna die, not because he got eaten, but because he got lifted up like 50 feet in the air, wrapped in
barbed wire,
and then dropped, and I was like, that guy's dead.
Oh, no, yeah, that guy needs some medical attention after this event. I like that this movie kind of subverted the trope of the black character in a horror movie always dying first, because the only one we get to see in these movies, or at least this movie, die is the filmmaker and also the TMZ motorcycle guy.
I'm Jake. No, but Jake, I'm sorry to break it to you. Keith David was the first person to die in this movie.
Oh, damn. My take is bad. I'm gonna have to delete this part because we're gonna get a bunch of YouTube comments again.
I was like, you're saying the first.
Oh, wait, no. I will follow you up on this one. Technically, the first people we see die are the cast members of Jordy's home on the screen.
You're right.
Bam, leaving this part in. Come on, YouTube comments, hit me up.
Yeah, I'll stand by the fact that, you know what, I can see that argument, and if someone doesn't correct you, then clearly you're right.
But yeah, I like this movie, man. But I don't know if I can think of anything that I actively disliked about this movie. Like, I'm trying to rack my head and trying to like look at this objectively and be like, oh, I don't think I like this part or this part. But I maybe I kind of would have liked an additional line or two from Jupiter's wife, Amber Park, or some of their kids or something like that. Like,
okay.
I'm trying to think what else I could have seen. Maybe having the character, I want to say her name was Bonnie Clayton, the woman who got mauled and attacked by the chimp in the beginning, and then we get to see their like disfigured form later as they arrive at the showing. Maybe would have liked a little bit of an incorporation of her character a little bit more in this movie. I think it was kind of sad and traumatic the way that Jupe seemed to have coped with his trauma by having what looked kind of like a shrine to capitalize on his trauma from the show in his office.
That he actively like sold to people.
Yeah, that was kind of this feeling of, man, I really hope you continue to seek therapy from that traumatic event, because while it seems like you're coping, the way you look into the distance when you're retelling the story kind of implies to me that you're still not over it, and understandably not over it, you know?
Yeah, and like the way he retells the story is by using the SNL skit, which is like, it's like there's like a sadness to that where it's like you can't even bring yourself to talk about the actual event and the best way you can do it is by referencing this like funny entertainment take on it.
Yeah, kind of like he's not even equipped to speak about it objectively as a horrifying experience, you know?
Yeah, he like weirdly disassociates himself. But I will say this: so there's the one thing that I think that we haven't touched on in the slightest. I think we mentioned the concept that surrounds it, but the one thing I think we haven't touched on at all, which is I think a big talking point for a lot of people, is the shoe.
Oh yeah, the shoe. I've seen a few thumbnails on YouTube being like, what does the shoe mean? What does the shoe represent?
And yeah, so I think we, I just wanted to touch on it briefly because I know a lot of people talk about it. But basically, like the idea that I'm of the opinion, and I agree with a lot of people's take, that it's the concept that he associates in this movie, which is it is a bad miracle, right? Something that is like a 1 in a million that should never happen, and it's like so crazy that you saw it, but the only reason it happened is because of like this absolutely terrible event.
Oh, okay.
Right. So like the idea that like it's standing straight up and that's physically impossible, and it's like, yeah, no, that's the only reason that's possible is because this group of actors got mauled by a chimpanzee.
Yeah, see, for me, the shoe stuck out initially when I watched the movie, right? But I didn't really make too much of it other than like, oh, I guess the shoe is pointing you up, so your attention will be drawn up. Or, oh, maybe the shoe was just kind of this like unsettling anomaly, kind of like watch out, or I don't really know. I didn't take that away from it being possibly a bad miracle, but that's interesting. I haven't heard that take before, actually.
Yeah, so I like that take. It kind of runs concurrent with all the other things that are like happen in the film. What else? Oh, I didn't talk about this. Again, there's no real negatives that I can bring up, but I can talk about more positives. I like the design that Jupe does for his kids' alien costumes. Right? Because one, the faces look like the side canisters of cameras.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so like, you know how they show the scene where they are like showing the Gordy attack, right? You'll see like 3 big TV cameras, and they have the big oval white canister with the black dots holding the film.
Okay, gotcha.
So like that's what the face looks like. But then the body of the costumes is very clearly modeled after like a monkey costume, so it's a chimpanzee.
Oh yeah, no, I got that the aliens kind of resemble a chimp, which feels like some subconscious thinking in terms of like Jupe's character designing something still impacted by his trauma.
Yeah, I think Jupe's, it's on like one end, it's like Jupe's character is like weird entity where it's like people's conversations about this film like center around how necessary he was and how necessary the Gordy stuff was, right?
Oh, I feel like it adds so much, man. It's intrinsic to this movie. It all comes together with his addition.
Yeah, that's why I was like, I think the people who say that, like, I think are missing, like, it's like a whole entire like mosaic, like where like these parts are like necessary, but you don't understand why until you like take it in as like an entire like piece of art.
Yeah.
Right?
And I mean, the design of the mask kind of resembling a camera goes into the other ideas of incorporating cameras into this movie, kind of like the alien's eye being semi-designed to be a shutter, the cameras on the property of the Haywoods, the incorporation of Angel's role, as in like the camera guy, the tech guy, it kind of still, it ties more things in.
So, I mean, yeah, oof, man, there's so much of this movie that I like.
Yeah, see, when you said there's something we haven't talked about, and you said the shoe, I thought you were going to talk about the wacky inflatable swinging arm tube men.
Oh yeah, we haven't talked about them. The real aliens of the movie. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, the real aliens that are all around us. They are here in everyday sight. We see them all around us. They're just waiting to strike.
Yeah, they're just there, just waiting to just pop up at any moment.
Just wave their wacky inflatable arms just everywhere. I was happy to see how they ended up being used, because when some of the trailers, or at least the pictures of this movie early on, showed those wacky inflatable swinging R2 men, I was like, what is that? How is that going to factor into this movie? And it actually factored in really well.
Yeah, so it's crazy that when I was watching the movie, when I saw those originally, right, and then I started watching the movie, I assumed what they were going to do was that they were going to use those to like advertise, effectively what Jupe does, and like advertise a show that they could put on using the alien, right? Like in like a very cynical, like they're also going to try to exploit this alien type thing, because they kind of like, they talk about like using this as a way to make money, right?
Yeah.
So I thought the imagery that I had seen prior to this movie, which is of the inflatable tube men with what they were discussing, I was like, oh, okay, so like that's what they're going for. And then to see that they used it more as like a beacon that can alert them to like where the location of the creature is, I'm like, oh, this is way smarter. And then the mentality that like as soon as it eats an inflatable tube man, or it knows because it doesn't like flags not to eat them, like those are a good way of doing it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is so smart. Like I would have never thought of this.
Yeah, and I mean the plastic from the flags and the tube men pretty much save Angel Torres's life in the end when he wraps himself in the plastic and the barbed wire.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, I can't think of anything wrong. I think people should watch this movie. There's so much that you dig into. There's so much symbolism and imagery. Obviously, that's the same thing, but like thematic stuff. Like clearly, like we talked about things that we saw in this movie that either one can be completely incorrect or like not intended. But like being able to have this conversation, this is what I love. Good. This is what I think good. Like this is why I like these types of movies and like why I appreciate them so much is because you get to get so much.
Oh, for sure. But I think that's a good place to wrap this one up.
Well, thanks for listening to this episode of the Just Pick Something podcast. If you haven't seen the movie Nope, go watch it. We've obviously enjoyed it. We spent like an hour over analyzing it, deconstructing it, trying to find every possible meaning or thing we saw in Nope. Maybe we got some right, probably got some wrong, but doesn't matter. It was a good time. What are your thoughts on the movie Nope? Send us an email with a username and your thoughts on the movie to jpspmailbag@gmail.com. You can find the email in the description, and if we get any responses, we'll try to read them at the end of the next episode. The intro and outro song for this podcast is VHS Dreams by Sean Ivers. Link in the description. Thanks for listening, and until next time.